Welcome to MindShift Power Podcast, a show for teenagers and the adults who work with them, where we have raw and honest conversations. I'm your host, Fatima Bey The MindShifter. Welcome. Today we have with us Mr. Jojo, who is a principal within New York State, at a high school within New York State. How are you today, Mr. Jojo?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great. So on today's episode, we're going to talk about school shootings, what from the perspective of a school principal, and STEM programs and what that means.
Sounds good.
Now, but Mr. Jojo, because you work at a high school, I want to ask you, how do you feel about school shootings?
Well, school shootings are very tragic, very very bad incidents. But as a principal at an urban school, it's something that I'm less concerned with.
Why is that?
Well, as you look at school shootings, there have not been very many that have been conducted by Black or brown students in Black or brown schools. For the
That's interesting.
majority, yeah, you'll see that they predominantly happen in white suburban schools, white rural schools, but most of the perpetrators are not Black and brown students. I think there may have been one, maybe, but it's not something that I go to work every day concerned with. My mom is always worried about me with school shootings and stuff like that, and I'm like, Mom, remember the school I work in? It's not like white suburban middle class where kids are just holding a grudge. Our kids are less likely to engage in something like that in a school building. We have had incidents where there's been concerns around a weapon being in the building, and generally speaking, it's like a BB gun or an airsoft gun, but kids don't have an intentionality around using it in our building. It's generally something they've forgotten in their bag or something like that.
Wow. Why do you think there is such a big difference between, like as you said, your concern for school shootings isn't as great because of the fact that you work at a mostly brown school, and an urban setting. But if you were in a suburban setting, do you think that concern would be greatly heightened?
Absolutely. I think there's a little bit of more access to weapons, honestly, in suburbia than there would be in urban schools. I think that kids that go to urban schools generally aren't coming to school to engage in that activity. This is generally their safest space that they have access to, and they really like to preserve that. This is where they can come to get away from some of the things that are happening in their community or their house. I grew up, myself in an urban environment, and just remember school being a place, you're fine, school being a place where, everyone felt safe as opposed to maybe walking down the street after you got out of school. And most of the time, kids that are really violent in urban settings kind of stop going to school around, ninth grade when they can. And so if I was in a suburban, if I was at a white upper middle class suburban school, I think there are some elements of that where kids, I'm not saying kids aren't bullied in urban schools, in Black and brown settings. They are. I've investigated a lot of them, but students in those schools seem to feel ostracized more, and generally, like, the way they look, their skin color, their financial background are generally more accepted in all places, right? Like everywhere they're accepted, they feel accepted, and then they go to school and they feel like the outsider. They feel like they don't have friends. They feel like nobody accepts them. And then they start to spin those wheels around why and get angry and then look to target people. That's my perception of it. Whereas most students that are in an urban school feel more accepted at their schools than they do potentially even at home sometimes with
Oh
kids that I
wow.
work with and talk to.
Well, that's interesting. And that's a perspective that I actually hadn't really heard before, before speaking with you. And I'm sure that it might be a surprise to some listeners. Some of the other listeners probably like, yeah, we know that already. Those who work in places like you probably already know that. But I think many of the listeners in here and maybe Canada, um, where school shootings are not as prevalent as they are here, might not understand that. And so, thank you for explaining that. And now,
Absolutely.
for the listeners, tell us how long you've been working in the education field.
Wow. Going on 19 years. This will be this is the end of year 19 for me. I started right out of college. I had been looking at going to law school. That was what I had planned to do.
Oh wow.
Came came back home, was accepted at a local law school, was touring the school, and at the time I was working at a restaurant. I love serving. It's one of my favorite jobs I've ever done is working in a restaurant. But either way, the law professor giving me a tour said, if you come to school here, you're going to have to quit your job. And I was like, well, I don't have money otherwise. Like, I need to work. Like, I don't come from money. My family's poor. Um, and he's like, well, you can still work there, but if we find out that you're working, we're going to kick you out of law school, because there's no way that you can have enough time to do all the work we require and to have a job. And at that point, I was like, maybe I need to rethink my life.
Oh wow.
So,
They really, I didn't know that they said that to you back then.
yeah, they sure did. And this is 2004. So I decided to apply for a couple jobs at a school district. Fell in love with working with Freshman Academy at an urban high school, and decided I was going to go back and become dual certified in special education and social studies.
Oh wow.
Became special education teacher, baseball coach for a long time, and then wanted to expand my influence, so went into educational leadership.
Okay.
Uh,
Well, thank you for letting us know what your background is. I think sometimes that matters when we're listening to people to understand where they're coming from. So you're not some person that just started working in education 5 days ago. You you have a lot of experience, and so what you're saying is coming from some knowledge and experience. And I like to talk to people who just have been around for a while because you've been able to see the difference over the past 20 years where education is now, and where it was, and the progression and the that it's had, and I would say digression in many respects that it's also had. um, Now I would like to move on to talking about STEM. So what now, you are the principal of uh, of a high school where there's a STEM program, and I want you to explain what STEM stands for those who are outside of New York State and might not know what it means.
sure. So STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. Our school does have a couple of different communities where students can learn college and career based skills. One of them has to do with the arts, or else we would have been a STEAM academy. A lot of times, the arts fits right in the middle of STEM. The design of things, the creativity that comes with STEM really lends itself to the arts. But they will be somebody that we partner with on a lot of projects. But yes, STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math.
Okay. And so you wanted to talk about STEM because you think that it's very important. So why is it important?
Man, STEM is in everything. Um, we have so many different community partners, including global partners, that are trying to really expose students to STEM-based careers and pathways. It's not just college. A lot of our partners
Hmm.
that we work with,
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
It's STEM is not just for kids that are
I'm
going
sorry,
on a
could you
course.
say it again? It's not just college.
It's not just for college.
I That's
Um,
something that I think is so extremely important for people to understand because we keep shoving down our kids' throat college, 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 and college can be good, but it's not for everybody, and there are other forms of education that you can pursue. But I digress. Go ahead.
no, absolutely, and that's one of the biggest things for me. I'm one of the only high school graduates in my entire extended family.
Oh wow,
My sister dropped out. My dad went to one day of high school.
wow.
My grandmother's claim to fame was that she had 2 degrees because she did my mother's work for her junior and senior year. So I understand how challenging, standardized education can be for some people.
Yeah. Hmm.
But I do think it's really important to help kids get through at least high school and have a pathway to a career.
Right.
So some of the partners that we have, they have engineering teams, right? And you're obviously going to college for a while for that. But they also have people that they just need to be handy, right? And they're going to be machinists.
Right.
It's really kind of, we grew up with the blue collar workforce and the white collar workforce, right? And blue collar were mechanics and they got greasy, and white collar worked in offices. Um,
Hmm.
but right now in STEM careers, they're really pushing this new collar workforce, it's called. So it could be somebody that wears a white dress shirt, but is also a machinist because they're not greasy. They're not really
Mm. Okay.
digging into oils and stuff like that. They might be replacing, um, a gear that's not super greasy. It's kind of a cleaner aspect of working with your hands. When you talk about creating, wafers. Okay, so the microprocessor chips that are in all of our cell phones, our cars, things
Hmm.
of that nature. That would be considered a new collar workforce where you're going to be working on a machine that carries these huge wafer discs that are like $200,000 a disc,
Wow.
and then moves it around this factory and infuses different gases inside of this controlled chamber, to be able to process what a company is looking that microprocessor to process, whether it be a car or your iPhone. I think there's like 96 of them in an iPhone. Okay, so it's
Wow.
amazing how many of them are used, and not everybody is on the biochemical engineering side of that production. There's a lot of people that are on the ground making sure that uh, the machines are running across the ceiling well, that the wafers are getting picked up at the right time, that they're in the machines the correct amount of time, based on what the engineers have designed. So a lot of the companies are telling me that they'd rather just train kids right out of high school rather than have them go to college,
Really?
which is really really interesting.
Is that
And
a
and
newer
then they,
development?
I would say definitely, but I think it also has to do with the fact that a lot of the companies want to tap into the students right out of high school so that they can see themselves progressing in that career pathway,
Mm.
to provide them the internal mentoring and supports so that they get to that end goal of potentially being an executive. But they really do want people to learn the whole gamut of the operations, and you can start. Some of the companies have said, do you know any kids that can work on lawnmowers, right? Like maybe somebody that's really good with lawnmowers or power scooters or stuff like that. And those are the kids they want because they're so creative, um, and knowledgeable without reading a manual, right? They just kind of
Ah,
know
a good
what to
point.
do.
Now, for those teenagers out there listening right now, y'all hear that? You'll hear that there is hope for you. There are ways that you can get into technology fields without going to college and make a lot of money. Because that's one thing I know you see it all the time, and I see it when I go to high schools and I deal with high school students and do workshops. How much money are we gonna make? They want to know about the money aspect, and I know that there is a lot of money in engineering. I know that there's different kinds of engineering, and I know engineering is I'm using as a general term, and I know that that's not the only position within the STEM field. I think it's the easiest one to talk about, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. Um, but what do you think the outlook is for the teenagers that are listening right now who are thinking about getting into engineering? How would you say the overall outlook? Now, you just talked about it a little bit, but I mean bigger picture. How is the overall outlook for engineers? Someone who wants to go into the engineering field today.
Oh my God, if you are a student at a high school that has any interest in engineering, uh, the jobs, there are more jobs than people available to take them.
I'm
Um,
sorry, could you repeat that part again?
there are more engineering jobs in the United States available than there are kids in engineering programs at colleges. A lot of times, companies are actually going overseas to India and China and doing a couple year contracts with engineering students there to bring them into the United States to fulfill some of the jobs.
Yeah.
They're very high paying. Um, you know, anywhere from a starting salary recently of 90 to $220,000, depending on your expertise with engineering field.
Hmm.
But if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind going back to talking to some of those teens that maybe have been messing up so far and give them some other STEM creative pathways that maybe they're not aware of.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
So one of my favorite STEM initiatives is via the Fab Foundation, and they are really centered on creativity and maker spaces.
Mm.
And so at our school, we have a maker space. A lot of people don't really know what that entails. It's kind of like this cool word to use, but within our maker space, we have final cutters, 3D printers, CNC routers, laser cutters, t-shirt presses, button makers,
That is so cool.
sublimation printers, embroidery. And so kids can really, or students or anyone, and we've had community nights where we've invited parents in to kind of
Hmm.
work on some of these machines. But we've had students create entire clothing lines based on the computer designs that they do, and then they use the sublimation printer, and then they make sweatshirts and they have them embroidered and they sell them for $80. There is so much money in creating on-demand products that I don't really think people understand. Like you can make freeze pop containers or holders that have somebody's name on them and sell them for $15.
Can I come
Um,
use your makerspace?
yeah, you can come in and work with it. Next time you're in, I'll show it to you. It's one of my most. It's like my happy place in the building. Like if I need to go see some cool
Oh,
things
really?
happening, I'll just go to that classroom, spend 20 minutes in there. You might see somebody, soldering electrical to create or to fix like an RC car, or somebody creating their logo for a design. But anytime youth sports are crazy in America, probably in Canada as well. But so anytime you go to like a baseball tournament or a hockey tournament, they're selling these cheap dry fit T-shirts
Yeah.
with a logo on it, $30.
Yep.
$30. It costs them like $6 to make. The vinyl is like 25 cents. It's ultra cheap, and there's a huge profit. And so, I know people that go to hockey tournaments and make $3,000 a day selling T-shirts and sweatshirts.
To me, this sounds like the for the teenagers and just young adults listening. It's a business that is fairly easy to get into, and I know this just beyond this conversation that it's something that some of you might consider, even if it's a side hustle. There are ways to do it. I'm a big fan of pushing entrepreneurialism, so you will hear that from me. And I think entrepreneurialism is not for everyone, but I think there's a lot of students who get into, especially STEM, STEM areas, in areas of engineering that could probably be take what they know and be a great entrepreneur with it. And they just that's not presented to them all the time, especially in urban settings. And I would love to see more of that. Um,
Absolutely.
Now, would you suggest? I was going to ask you about digital fabrication, but you kind of talked about that already. How would you suggest some of these youths who are not in New York State that don't have a system like yours, and they might not even have a makerspace in their school? What would you say to those students who they're in a high school where STEM is not a focus, but they are really truly a STEM student? What can they do?
So there's a couple options. I mean, you can Google the Fab Foundation just to start. Okay, they have I think over 7,000 Fab Labs spread throughout the
Oh,
world.
wow.
And so you can just Google Fab Foundation, and you'll have access in a lot of countries um, to a digital fabrication lab that is supported by the Fab Foundation. So I know there's a lot at um, libraries and museums throughout Canada, in Europe. That's kind
Hmm.
of where their hub is based.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
for example, Pittsburgh has like the Carnegie Science Center, and they have I think like a couple mobile Fab Labs, but they also do summer STEM camps. And so, if you looked up Fab Foundation, that would be where I would start. Just if you're interested in the digital fabrication, getting into those types of things. But um, I think there are so many museums and libraries in local places that actually offer maker spaces and creative labs. I know that
Hmm.
we've opened up one or two locally in our area. They're expensive to get started, but a lot of
Yeah.
times, there's some really uh, there's some companies that donate a lot of money to urban
Hmm.
locations to have them create maker spaces and fab
I'm going to
labs.
interrupt you for 1 second. Because our audience is national, well, really international because we're including Canada. Makerspace is a word that is more commonly used right now. I know that I'm familiar with it, but what are some other terms that they can search for that might not be called makerspace? What are some other terms that they could search for if they're looking for a place like that?
Um, I mean, that's a big one, but I would also go with Fab Foundation. Um, EduFab is another one. See if
Oh,
your local
okay.
schools have a partnership with EduFab. There's a woman that I've worked with quite extensively that runs EduFab, and that's a partner of the Fab Foundation. So they create the lesson plans and the creative activities for schools to use in their makerspaces. You could also just kind of type in like digital fabrication. Um, and it's kind of interesting. Like I have a former student, former baseball player that went into welding, um, and ended up working at a digital fabrication plant as the master welder for some of the things that they can't do on the other machines. Like there still needs to be some handheld stuff done,
Okay.
while you're fabricating. So it's really this interesting collective of people. Now, one of the best things about digital fabrication, makerspace, and Fab Foundation is that it's very attuned to international collaboration.
Okay.
Um, so if you start to get into those fields, then they do a lot of like I think it's called open source, where everyone can have access to some of the programs that you're using. So if you're looking at creating, a design, you can kind of Google and look up those designs, and then say, you've already made that. Um, you would generally share that with me for free. It's a
Hmm.
really, really collaborative space,
Another key term,
and some
open
of
source. Okay.
and so some of the things that we've looked at doing is collaborating with schools in Malaysia and France through some of the partnerships that I've had with Fab Foundation and met at international conferences, um, to work across time zones on similar projects. And I think one of the areas that you'll see making and the Fab Foundation and just digital fabrication in general is providing really, really affordable access to technological resources across the world. One of the initiatives the Fab Foundation had is they created a floating makerspace and sent it down the Amazon River to work with local indigenous tribes
Oh,
to
wow.
try to create solutions for even helping them create cleaner water,
Wow.
um,
That's awesome.
or easier ways to fabricate their homes. It's really, really cool. And so, and part of me feels a little bit uncomfortable with that. Like, I really wouldn't want to mess too much with like an indigenous tribe in along the Amazon River, because like, that's how they do business.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you can provide them with something that's going to allow them to have a little bit of more access to this, which helps their lives,
Yeah.
without having to, get a McDonald's also
Yeah.
there,
Right. No,
or
yeah, I get
something
it.
like that.
Help,
They
but
try
not
to
completely
not,
change their structure.
yeah, yeah. So, um, I'm excited to see what the future of, digital fabrication and making becomes for the next generation of students.
Mm. I'm excited about that too. I mean, digital fabrication and everything tech. I would say I generalize STEM as everything tech. That's Fatima verbiage for it. Um, I see that as our future. Even before talking to you, I'm just like, well, that's our future. That's where we're headed. And so why not get into a field where you know that's where everything's going to be. And the thing is that I also want the listeners to understand, and um, you can piggyback on this or correct me, but um, within the all of the tech fields, there's not just tech positions. Everything is not going to be able to be automated. AI is taking over a lot of things. Let's be real about that. But AI can't take over everything. There's some human touch that's still going to be necessary. So there might be someone necessary to take notes. There's still going to be need for administrative assistance. There's still going to be need for innovative ideas, even if you're not the one to implement them. We might need your brain to help us come up with the next innovative idea. There are many, many, many different positions within the field that aren't just tech oriented that might be necessary, correct?
Absolutely, and I'm glad you brought up AI because some of the local partners that I have are also computer programmers and coders, and that's one of the most recent STEM courses that we've kind of grown here is coding, computer programming, computer science, and when AI dropped, one of my partners, they were real scared because
Mm,
you can go into Chat GPT or other AI programs and literally type exactly what you want, um, for the code to be, what you're looking for, and then it creates that code pretty instantaneously for you. So, I think that we're right at the tip of the AI iceberg. I think it's going to be as I don't know if I want to use the word disruptive, but I feel like it is going to be as disruptive to our lives as electricity was when
yeah,
we
I,
started
I
to
agree with
harness
you.
that.
I could see where you're coming from with that.
And I mean disruptive, like, back in the day before electricity, you couldn't really work at night, right? Like, there were
Yes.
certain hours of employability, and that sounds great, right? I mean, that sounds like really nice to have things kind of shut down at a certain point in time. Um, but AI, I hope we can harness it, and really kind of create a society that's better for us rather than the opposite. Like, you watch Terminator, and
Yeah.
that's what I go
I
to when
think the
I think
key
of
thing
AI.
to all of that um, is balance. Is just to make sure that we're balanced with it because I think it can be very, very, very helpful. I use AI in some things, but I don't use it in everything.
Yeah,
If we are using AI to replace our brains, that's extreme, that's imbalance, and that's bad. If we use AI to assist our brains, that's a beautiful, perfect balance. And we just got to make sure we stay there. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people that don't because they like to go to extremes and just be silly.
yeah,
But I'm hoping that I mean, it does really. I couldn't do all that I'm doing if I didn't use AI for some things because it cuts down on me taking an entire day to create something. I could take
Right.
what AI gives me, and then I could tweak it and make it my own. I don't just take AI stuff anyway. I tweak anything that they do for my own. But in wrapping up, I would like for you to speak to the adults who are working, the adults who are either parents or working with youth that have STEM interests or talents. What would you say to them?
I would say continue to push them, continue to work with those students, continue to expose them to things that they didn't even know were possible within the
Mm,
careers of STEM. And I would even like to say to people that work with kids who they don't think are interested in STEM or don't have a passion in STEM, that if you expose those students to the wide variety of activities and educational experiences and companies that are STEM based, you may open up their eyes to something they didn't even realize existed and a passion in them that they can really see themselves doing moving forward. Um, I think that's been some of the biggest eye openers for me are bringing kids on a field trip and their teachers like, oh, that kid shouldn't go. They have a D minus in this math class and that's
mm-hmm.
STEM based. And then I bring them on a field trip and they come back and they're like an A plus kid because now they
Yep.
see where they want to go,
Mm-hmm.
and they see how much better their life can be if they actually work hard, in that STEM based career. Um, I think that's been some of the most eye opening. I think the kids that are already motivated just keep pushing them, keep exposing them, and the kids that aren't do the same thing because they might not even know what exists for them.
No, you're absolutely right. I will tell you, I've always been a crafty person, and as you know, and I'm not sure if the listeners know, but I'm also a professional seamstress. I make and design wedding gowns, and I have a separate business for that. I would not have gotten into. I don't know that I would have gotten into wedding gowns the way I have if I hadn't first worked at a bridal shop, selling them at first, before managing the alteration department. And I have a strong passion. I love working with brides. I love working with wedding gowns. I don't know that I would have known that if I hadn't been exposed to it. I had a retail management background, but before I went to work at David's Bridal, because that's where I was for 10 years, but I had a retail management background before then, but I didn't know that I had such a passion for wedding gowns in the bridal industry until I was in it, until I was doing it and put in a position, where I had to work it. And then I realized, wow, I have a passion for this. And I don't think that that's unique to me. I was an adult at the time, but that's just a human thing, like you just said, and for some of our teens, we need to just let them experience some things, and that's how they'll discover what they do and don't like. Sometimes we presenting it in the classroom doesn't mean a damn thing until they're actually putting their hands to it and experiencing it, or at least maybe virtually experiencing it, or going through some kind of experience that'll show them what this particular thing is like, and then it can open up the doors. It's like, I didn't realize how much I love peaches until I tasted one.
Absolutely. The same goes for, I think, some of my biggest learning experiences in my life were experience is going after something that I thought I'd really love and be passionate about, and then realizing it was absolutely not
Mm-hmm.
for me.
Yep. That's so true.
And I thankfully learned a lot of those lessons before, I was done with my education, before I was locked into a career, and was able to find something that I'm super passionate about, something that I really enjoy, something that doesn't feel like a job every day. It feels like,
Yeah.
it's exciting, it's cool, it's fun, it's new every day. So, I think exposure to things helps kids see what they want to do, but more
Mm-hmm.
importantly, what they definitely don't want to do.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. Well, it is time to wrap up, and I really, really, really appreciate you coming on, taking the time to talk to our audience and letting them hear what you have to say. And I'm hoping that what was said here today is useful and helpful to both adults and teens. And so, again, I thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
And now, for a mind-shifting moment. When someone with as much experience as him says what he says about school shootings, there's something to it. I would like for you to examine why. And when it comes to the future of technology and you're a teenager, you know you want to be in that field. You're not sure what yet. Don't just go with the positions that are presented to you. There are thousands of positions out there. Don't wait for them to bring it to you. You bring it to them. Thank you for listening to MindShift Power Podcast. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel at The MindShifter. If you have any comments, topic suggestions, or would like to be a guest on the show, please visit fatimabey.com/podcast. Remember, there's power in shifting your thinking. Tune in for next week.